Back in 1965, future billionaire and co-founder of some company called Intel, Gordon Moore, was working as the director of R&D at Fairchild Semiconductor. He had an interview with the imaginatively named Electronics magazine and got asked to predict where all this semiconductor stuff was going. In summary, he said that the number of components in a dense integrated circuit appears to double every year, and said that it would continue to do so for the next decade. Like most far-seeing individuals who shaped the technological world, he was completely wrong. The difference between Moore and the average internet user is that he was willing to admit that his original quote was slightly off the mark, and his revised expectation was that after about 1980, this doubling would happen roughly every 2 years rather than annually. This proceeded to happen for the next 30 years and change, catapulting the technological development of electronics through the effectiveness of the integrated circuit and the density of the components it could sport, while simultaneously giving Moore bragging rights for the title of modern-day Nostradamus, in addition to his other accolades. But as scaling sizes got smaller and smaller, and manufacturing became more effective, the doubling started to slow. Entirely coincidentally, this was around 2008 to 2010. This decrease presented a different technological playing field for newer developers of both hardware and software. By this point, the richer or more privileged computer users had multi-core systems with dedicated graphics cards, running at 1080p through LCDs, and using an internet connection for games instead of optical media. It wasn't entirely ubiquitous, but it most definitely was the high-end mass-marketed thing at the time, and gaming settings reflected this in their options. To my grumpy disbelief, 2010 started 13 years ago as of the publication of this video, and if you go back 13 years from then, you'll see a marked difference in home PC systems. In 1997, DOS gaming was still a thing, and most computers had single-core processors, optical media, limited broadband or dial-up, and if they were really lucky, they might even have a graphics card. The sheer difference between the computers of then and the computers of 2010 is huge when compared to the 2010 machines and present-day devices, which largely amount to the same thing your past machines did, but more efficiently and with better power management and/or resolutions. The end. I still use the machine I built in 2011 on a daily basis. It's a bit of a Frankenstein's monster of parts, but it does the job. I've talked in the past about how the graphical improvements started to have diminishing returns, and unsurprisingly, the exact same thing happened with the hardware too. What does this have to do with DOS gaming being better though? Well, the innovations of the gaming world came as a direct response to this surge in hardware capability, and when everything has been normalized and standardized, and all the incredible breakthroughs have been broken through, you're left with a degree of stagnation. Since the mid to late 2000s, we've been doing roughly the same things with the same tools, and the only big changes haven't really been as big. Hey, here's that thing you do, but the device is smaller and more power efficient. Thanks guys, I remember seeing portable gaming back in the early 90s. As a concept, that's not new in the slightest, you've just made it more powerful. The obvious exception to the rule is the rise of mainstream VR adoption, but I've talked about that already in this series. It's not new, but it is to Joe Bloggs, who still suffers from motion sickness when he tried it out and remains unsure. His mind is like a stubborn wood fire burner that's just not catching. That anecdote may have been a bit close to home for me actually. Talk of the killer game or program to push VR even further and change the mind of Joe Bloggs reminds me of the year of the Linux desktop meme. It most likely will happen eventually, but I think it'll be a slow and gradual acceptance rather than an immediate en masse adoption. With the money becoming more of an issue in the 2020s and the diminishing returns of graphical fidelity, that golden goose of "it's like X but with better graphics" has also produced less excitement than before. This has caused gamers to focus less on how pretty everything looks and fall back to functionality and enjoyment. And the more people doing that, the more who are realizing that the older games offered more fun. If everyone is on the same baseline with widescreen 1080 to 8K resolutions and 3D accelerated graphics, It's less about who has the sweetest turbo RGB liquid-cooled passive auto mega hyper extreme cache destroyer rigs, and more about the enjoyment of the hobby. Developers have moved away from polygon count and have instead gone into aesthetics, atmosphere, and deliberate stylistic choices in order to distinguish themselves visually from other titles. Crysis was released in 2007. That was 15 years ago now. Visually it still holds up, and was the cause of controversy when modern-day Crytek attempted to remaster it and ended up making it look not better. In order for a game to really push the graphical envelope, it either needs to be stylized or made by a giant studio, or one that specializes in engine building. There's a strange stagnation going on in both the hardware and games development sector right now, and while I don't know the exact answer as to why it's happening, there's a growing dissatisfaction among players, and a belief that we really should be further along the technological chain than we presently are. With the increasing prevalence of retrofuturism and constant references to hoverboards, there's a sense that we're being held back, either deliberately or due to poor hiring practices or the economic instability of the world. And that's just another great reason why the time that DOS gaming existed in was better. Computing was still a frontier of emerging technology, a melting pot of ideas and beliefs, and a gated community that accepted only the best and brightest in their disciplines, rather than a mass-market industry with a poor noise-to-signal ratio. It's a clash of beliefs and ideals that continues to rage within the community. Exclusivity of opportunity versus worldwide availability. Are slim pickings with great quality control at the expense of the majority better than less innovation but a greater number of games that pass muster? Is the world better for having everyone online, or was it better when that functionality was limited based upon merit and opportunity? As a society, should we sacrifice the quality of living for some to benefit the majority? Do the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one? Or should we fire the one onto the Genesis planet in order to resurrect him so that he may assist in saving the world from a space entity masquerading as a god that has radicalized its brother, and then save a chancellor with cowboy diplomacy? Sorry, getting a little off topic there. In conclusion, aside from Windows 95 through to XP, DOS gaming offered the most games when Moore's Law was still a thing. And unlike those later Windows titles, the rules hadn't been set in stone yet, making it one of the most intriguing back catalogues in all of gaming.